Being a multi-generational church is like a really important value to us. It's something that we have held on to as a church and believe in, even as a calling, going back even before I was the senior pastor around here. It's in our DNA. But one of the things that we have learned over the years of being a multi-generational church is it's not easy to be a multi-generational church. There's lots of struggles and tensions with it, and it hasn't gotten any easier in the last couple of years either with this. But you know, it's not easy to be multi-generational anything in our world today, right? There's a lot of tension out there. There's a lot of struggle with that. And Ryan and I were able to sit down with 3 groups of people here recently, all from a different generation, and just talk about this a little bit. And we talked about their experience with these differences.
So what do you all notice most about the differences between boomers and millennials? What's the biggest difference you see between the two?
I see it like this. Boomers are very structured and millennials are like anti-structure. They don't want rules. They don't want to be on time. It's a generalization, but it's a very obvious one. Baby boomers, they're going to be on time.
So what do you think older generations think of when they think of millennials?
I think we're most known or stereotyped as being entitled, feeling like we deserve things that we haven't earned.
I think we get a lot of that we're inexperienced and that we don't really know what we're doing. I feel like that's what I have experienced, at least from different generations on us.
Where do you hear that?
Well, when it's told to your face from someone of a different generation, you're like, all right, cool.
Like at work or neighborhood or like.
Yeah, like I've literally had someone tell me, like, you don't know what you're doing. You're too young to be in the job you're in. You're just entitled, and this is a hobby for you. And I'm just like,
I think older generations often think that we give up easily, or that we don't try to push through the difficult things, that we just, it's getting hard and I'm just gonna not push through that.
How do you think they would describe you guys? What do you think they'd say?
I think, and I'm gonna put it on our kids because they do this sometimes, is they think we're really stuffy.
Traditional.
Anyway, yeah, like the
conservative.
Yeah, and I think they think that's what we are.
Have you ever heard of the phrase "okay, boomer"?
No.
You have not?
No.
Oh, really? Okay.
No.
So like there's like t-shirts and posters and all kinds of things with this phrase, and it just says "okay, boomer." And millennials tend to be the people who purchase this particular shirt. And it is usually in reference to just the idea of like, they think they know everything.
Have your thoughts, which you think are perfect or spot on.
Yeah.
Okay, boomer.
Like the stereotype
Dismiss.
exists to the degree that there's like commercial marketing.
But I wonder if at the point where we are in our age, the millennials, when they get to be our age, might not think the same thing of themselves. I don't know.
The tension is there, and it's real. And even as I was prepping for this series and this morning, like you could see it out there. But when I think about the church, right, there's something more for the church. There's a higher kind of calling for the church, because we live in a world where that tension between generations has been there a long time, and it's not going to just go away. And if there's any place that should be a picture of how there can be unity between generations in a beautiful way, like it should be with the church. And there's a passage I want to look at this morning where Paul speaks to the value and this kind of calling to the church to have unity. And if you have your Bibles, turn with me to Ephesians chapter 4. Ephesians chapter 4. Because I want us to look at this. And he's speaking to this more than just like unity between generations. He's talking about unity across the board, including the kinds of struggles that we might have between generations. He says this, and it's at the beginning of chapter 4. Look at verse 1. He says this: "As a prisoner for the Lord, then, I urge you to live a life worthy of the calling you have received. And he says this because he's writing this from prison, and it's like he can't go and just go and work on these things at the church in Ephesus. But he's saying, join me with this. I urge you, be with me in seeing this beautiful calling that the church has. And he goes on through this whole thing, and there's a bunch in Ephesians about this idea of this calling of unity that we are to have. But the question becomes, how? How do you go about achieving and finding that kind of deep and beautiful unity? I want to read this to you because I wrote this, if the world were to write a verse on, okay, how do we achieve this unity? And just looking at how our world handles things, I think this is what the world would say about this. Here's what I wrote. Be completely firm and strong in how you know you're right. Be quick, focus on the issues. Make every effort to keep the wagon circled around your view of the world through the bond of holy arrogance until everyone agrees, right? Just stick to your guns and stick to your guns, and then you'll find unity through agreement when you can get everyone to your side. If you need to shout louder, right? That's in so many ways, that's how the world would turn to this. But I want you to see, again, what Paul says about this. Look at verse 2, and here's how he says to go after how to live out this calling in a more practical way. Verse 2, he says this, be completely humble and gentle. Be patient, bearing with one another in love. Make every effort to keep the unity of the Spirit through the bond of peace. That is so countercultural to the kind of messaging we hear in our world today. Right? This would be so out of the box. But they're amazing words. Let me read it to you just one more time, and then I want to break these words down here. He says this, right? Be completely humble and gentle. Be patient, bearing with one another in love. Make every effort to keep the unity of the Spirit through the bond of peace. So, right, he says this because this is how we live out this higher calling, that whatever it is that might divide us or keep us from uniting in a more beautiful way in Christ and in love, he's saying, this is the way forward. And so I want to just take a moment and just walk through this passage just a little bit here, and then apply it even more directly as we think about this thing of different generations within one church here. So he starts off, right, and he says, be completely humble and gentle. Right? This is the opposite of arrogance, right? It's the opposite of saying, well, I'm just right. I'm right about this thing, right? How many times have we felt that or have said that in a moment? What he's imploring us to do here, right? To be completely humble is to be open. It's to be a learner. It's to say, okay, I'm going to pause and I'm going to try and understand. Even if I end up not agreeing with it in the end, I'm still going to seek to be open that maybe I would change my mind on this, that I'm going to learn something, that I don't know everything in this. And arrogance is harsh. There's a harshness to it. And this is important, that in seeking this kind of humility of being open and learning, even in those moments where you're open, you examine something and you come back and you say, even though I've heard the other side and I've explored this, it's only made me more convinced than ever about whatever it is you're convicted about. You don't have to hold that belief or that conviction with harshness, do you? We can always hold those beliefs with gentleness. And that's what he's saying, that you don't have to have that harshness with those beliefs. He says this, he says, be patient. That's a rough one, right? Be patient. But What he's saying is give people time. Be slow to force issues. Be slow to make demands. Be slow to take stands on things. Because isn't this true? Faith in Jesus is not a faith of panic, worry, or controlling others, right? If you find yourself in a place like on some issue between you and someone else, and you're finding yourself in a place of panic or worry or trying to control them or push something, you're not living in the faith of Jesus in that moment, because faith in Jesus isn't a faith of panic or worry in those things. And he goes on and he says, bearing with one another in love. I love this part. Bearing with one another, right? To bear with, it means in whatever the situation is, like you're finding a way to bear with, to hold, or to bear up that person or the story that you have in this. To bear up means that you're going to hold something about this person in a different way. Instead of rushing to a story or a motive about that person that is assuming the worst of that person, to bear up with them, it says, okay, I'm not going to jump to, well, they are saying that or doing that because it's a character issue. It's a flaw in them, right? That's not bearing up with them. Bearing up with them is saying, okay, how can what's the story? What's the lens? What's the view that I can take that helps me hold them up? That even if we disagree, there's a kind of understanding that helps me be with them. I'm going to keep bearing with them. And so to bear up means to be quicker to assume the best in them. And this takes great intentionality, and it takes work to gain some understanding of someone who maybe doesn't see things the way that you do. He goes on, he says, make every effort. And notice the language in this. Make every effort. Be completely, right? Make every effort to keep the unity of the Spirit, not the unity of agreement. That's a totally different kind of unity. We're not going to find that in the church or very many places in life, right? And that's really a pseudo kind of unity anyhow. But instead, a kind of unity through trusting God, even when we don't agree, right? That I will find unity in the Spirit by trusting God in me, even when I don't understand why that person believes that or is coming at it in that way, or despite my frustration in this. And he goes on, through the bond of peace, we can have a kind of bond with one another. And at the very least, it's understanding that we share this. We all share this. We all want peace. Take any issue, and on either side, it's people who want peace, right? And so often we lose peace, but it's because we let go of peace in moments because there's something that we fear. We let go of peace because we feel like there's something we must defend. We let go of peace out of shame. There's just all of these things. But if we can always remind ourselves that even below those, there is a desire for peace, that whatever I'm dealing with other people within my church, we all want peace in this, that he's imploring us to move forward in all of this. He's saying that there's a kind of way that you can move forward that pulls us into unity. And not just that this is a good thing, right? He's saying this is our calling. And it starts with a lot of realization. You cannot be completely humble. You can't bear with one another in love. You can't be patient without taking the deliberate steps of creating understanding. And part of where that understanding goes is this, and there's something I want you to see in this, but it's this. The first step is in realizing each generation is doing the best they can with the cards that they were dealt in life.
And it's a quote about a particular generation. And I want you to take a wild guess at what generation this writer is talking about. The younger generation now reaching maturity seems utterly incapable of taking on their responsibility to the nation. They are more aimless, soft, and generally immature. What generation do you think that was written about?
I feel like that captures what we think people think of millennials.
That was our parents saying about us.
Yeah,
Yes.
I was just gonna say it's
I
about
think so, too.
boomers.
Or the generation before them saying about them.
Every generation. I think a boomer said it about Gen X.
Ooh, really? Okay. Huh.
It just seems like something that you could say about almost every generation if you're the older generation.
Yeah, I think it would be our parents saying it about our generation.
It was written back in the late 30s, and the author, his name is Lester Tenney. He is was a World War II survivor from the Bataan Death March, and it was written about his generation right before they were getting ready to go into war. And the thing to think about is that generation that it was being said about, we refer to them now as the greatest generation because of what they endured. And you read his book and realize what he went through. It's like, oh my gosh, the metal they were made of was unbelievable. But that's what was said of them at one point.
How many of you, if you were guessing, guessed correctly that it was the greatest generation that quote was for? Anyone? Yeah, it's okay. A couple of you. Yeah. Here's the amazing thing about that. I came across that quote just reading this book, not even for this series. It was just a book I was reading myself personally, and I was just like, how in the world could anyone think that of that generation? But it just goes to show that, like, right? Every generation gets these labels. There's things that are said about every single generation, and we all feel them. We feel them about what's being said about our generation, and oftentimes we think them about other generations. But if we are to actually come together in unity, we need to begin growing our sense of understanding in order to bear with one another, right? And part of that understanding starts with what I said right before this video, and that is it's understanding that every generation is like they're doing the best with the circumstances, with the hand that they were dealt, that they could. The other thing is this realization, and it's this. Every generation is dealt a unique hand of cards during their formative years, right? And by that, what I mean is during those formative years of, like, think about like adolescence through like their very young adulthood. Every generation faces like these life-altering events, and because it's during their formative years, it does something. So like the second realization I'd say is this: every generation has a different view on life with unique cares and concerns because they uniquely went through those formative those life-altering events at that formative age or years in there. And so every generation, we all have these different views because of our circumstance and the lens that we have. And if we don't understand that, we will incorrectly evaluate, judge, or read the actions and motives of every other generation out there. Right? It's a way of happening. And so I look at what Paul says and why he says, okay, man, it takes a lot of patience. It takes bearing up. It takes a lot of humility. It takes a lot of listening because it takes a lot of understanding. Every generation has so much to offer. Every generation has a gift that is beautiful. And that even came out as Ryan and I were talking to these different groups in different generations. And I want you to just hear some of what they have to say about this.
What do you think are some of the things that, as a generation, that your generation really values a lot?
I think we value community. I think
Yeah.
that's a big thing.
They'll stick with you to the end. You know, you can ride this roller coaster ride of life
as you think about where the world is right now, what do you think millennials bring that like the world needs right now?
I think we're super flexible and adaptable. We're moving around more and creating new families of our own out of our friend group and creating stability out of that and our ability to adapt to new things because everything's always changing.
Okay.
I think one of our greatest strengths is that we're supportive and we're inclusive.
What would you all hope that Generation X would be known for?
I was kind of thinking right along what Adam was saying. It's just I would hope that we're known for seeing people for who they are and loving them.
Anything that when you think about other generations, like you think about your parents, you think about your kids, co-workers in those different generations, what's unique about Xers?
I think we came right in the middle of kind of the boomer generation and the younger generation, which probably helped us balance each other because now we're getting acclimated to so much technology, as Dan was mentioning, and we're actually training the boomers and the younger kids are training us. So we're kind of like in the middle.
When people look at your generation, what would they say? Or when you look at your generation, what would you say? Like this is where we started, but this is where we are. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, because of being a post-war generation and our parents having gone through the Depression, World War II, and during the 50s and first part of the 60s, things were pretty rigid. I mean, you believe what you believed, and but then all of a sudden, there was a big explosion. Civil rights movement, women's liberation movement, all these different movements. And so it started to make us kind of expand and think more about outside the box at that point and see all these other different things happening. And so I think for this generation, we probably moved more from that rigidity into having more of an open mind about different things because of all the events that occurred. And so it really changed our minds in a lot of ways.